Hello, everyone. Nick here again, here in week 5, talking about life. Ooh, there we go. Life Together by Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Some great things that came out of the reading. So, just a few observations and items that I pulled out. The first is that the idea that Christian brotherhood, in the words of Bonhoeffer, we could easily say Christian community or fellowship, perhaps, it is not an ideal that we can aspire to. Rather, it is a divine reality. And it goes on to say that human wishes or human dreams intended to influence or drive community can actually act as a hindrance. And I thought that was so interesting because how often do we sit around our conference room tables, in churches or paraministry organizations, and we do visioning or we do strategic planning or we try to come up with ways to help boost discipleship or engagement. And it goes right back to what Dr. Randolph talked about in his synopsis from last week's reading, that instantly going to programming for solutions isn't necessarily the right path. And so it was just a kind of an eye opener. How many times have we sat down to vision and help create something positive that maybe we were inadvertently working against ourselves? So again, not something I had thought about before reading some of his words. A connection that I made I thought was kind of fun, at least for me, is as Bonhoeffer was talking about singing and the ministry of singing and singing in fellowship, he uses the terms vanity and bad taste should not enter into song. And so that vanity and bad taste must not enter into the song. And he highlights some of these violations. No improvising, don't sing well below or well above where everyone else is singing. Soloists who tend to violate both of those don't be doing those things. And then he talks about the unmusical, which seem to be the least important of the violators. But all of these can have an impact on the music in the ministry. So he says you need to avoid these things. And it made me think of the rules or the directions that John Wesley has for singing. If you look at the beginning or the front pages of the United Methodist Hymnal, you'll see his directions for singing. And he talks about these things to avoid. He warns singers against singing hymns differently. Only sing them as they are written. He says, don't sing as though you're half asleep or half dead. Sing modestly. Don't sing distinctly from the rest of the congregation. And I think it was, again, an interesting connection between the two because worship, I feel, can be very organic. And sometimes those aspects of worship that just pop up can sometimes be the best parts. And if we restrict ourselves to certain rules with singing or otherwise, we might be holding ourselves back. We might be limiting the spirit, perhaps, in some regard. And so, again, there are some folks who really just like to belt it out. Maybe they should tone it down a bit. But by and large, it was just an interesting connection for me to see some of what Bonhoeffer argued for and tying that into some words that John Wesley had shared that were along the same vein. A quotation that I pulled out that really got me thinking, Bonhoeffer says that he who would learn to serve must first learn to think little of himself. That's on page 94. And, written in the context of his ministry of meekness, Bonhoeffer seems to agree with Thomas à Kempis, who said that one must always think highly of others but little of oneself. On face, I disagree with that. If what they're really saying is that we should always think less of ourselves and think more of others, on face, I disagree with that. In fact, I would more likely agree with a quotation that was attributed to C.S. Lewis that says, true humility is not thinking less of yourself, it is thinking of yourself less. Now, it might be the translation that is making it seem as though Bonhoeffer or Kempis are saying that, think of yourself as less than, always think of others as greater than. I don't think that's what they're saying. I mean, it's so hard to tell. Bonhoeffer does reference Romans 12:3 that talks about do not think of yourself more highly than you ought to, which would go a little bit more in line with C.S. Lewis. But on face, I disagree. I don't think that we have to think less of ourselves in order to think better of others. I think it can be a both and proposition. We can put ourselves lower on the pedestal and others up above, putting their needs or their desires ahead of ours at times. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. So again, that might not be, again, it might be the translation, But if taken at face value, I would disagree with Bonhoeffer and Akempis, for that matter, that we must think little of ourselves if we are going to serve. I think we can serve and still think well of ourselves, but as Paul writes in Romans, not thinking of ourselves higher or more importantly than we ought to. So, and very briefly, one of the questions that I pulled out is that Bonhoeffer argued that Christianity means community through Jesus Christ and in Jesus Christ, and that we belong to one another only through Jesus Christ. And again, this might be just reading it on face, but if Bonhoeffer is arguing that we only find community, we can find Jesus in community, what does that? How does that speak to the desert fathers and the desert mothers, the hermits and the ascetics? Are they in community because they are kind of in Jesus with the rest of us? Are they in less community because they're not with others in physical proximity? Just an interesting question. Again, I might be reading it in a different way, and I appreciate any other interpretation, but appreciate any of your thoughts. Look forward to watching your videos, and I hope this finds you all well. Take care.